Today, we're going to dive into a pretty profound educational idea, one that wants to completely reshape how we think about learning. It's called the Freedom of Spirit curriculum, and trust me, it challenges some of our most basic ideas about what school is even for.
It really all boils down to this classic question, doesn't it? For so long, it feels like school has been about filling a bucket, just pouring information into a student's head. But what if the real job of education is to light a fire, to actually cultivate that unique, amazing internal world inside every single learner? Well, that's the big idea we're exploring today.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the core philosophy. What is freedom of spirit? Then we'll see how that one idea just ripples outward. It changes the student into a free agent. It totally reshapes the curriculum. It makes us rethink testing. And in the end, it helps build an entire school culture designed for people to really, truly flourish. All right, let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is freedom of spirit? Getting this one idea is the key. It's what unlocks everything else in this entire model.
Think of freedom of spirit as a learner's internal compass. It's their ability to think and feel and act in a way that actually lines up with their own values and their own sense of purpose as it's developing. The goal here isn't to hand them a map that's already made. Nope. It's to help them build and read, and most importantly, trust their own compass.
Now, this quote is so important because it clears up a huge misunderstanding. Freedom of spirit does not mean no rules, no guidance, just letting students run wild. It's the exact opposite. It's about intentionally creating the perfect environment, the right conditions, the right soil, so that their own autonomy can mature and grow really strong. And you get that balance with these three core rules. First, you have to protect the learner's inner life, their curiosity, their dignity. Second, you have to provide structured development, the actual knowledge, the skills. And third, you instill a sense of responsibility, making sure that their personal growth also helps the community around them. See, it's a mix of freedom and structure working together.
So this leads to a really fundamental shift in how we see students. Once a school really commits to this idea of freedom of spirit, the student is no longer just a passive object in a classroom. They become an active, free agent in their own learning.
And the difference is, well, it's night and day. The traditional model, it often treats the learner like an empty vessel, just passively receiving info so they can conform and perform. Mistakes, those are bad. They get penalized. But in this freedom of spirit model, the learner is an active participant shaping their own journey. The goal is self-discovery, and mistakes aren't just tolerated. They are a necessary, crucial part of how we learn. So what does this actually look like day to day? It means students get to make real choices. They have real conversations about their own goals. They're actually encouraged to trust their gut. And so importantly, they learn that trial and error isn't something to be afraid of. It's just how we grow. It's essential. Okay, so that brings us to the curriculum. Because if you're going to treat students as unique individuals, you obviously can't use a one-size-fits-all curriculum. You have to build a system that's flexible, one that nurtures actual people, not one that just cranks out identical products. And here's how the architecture works. It's a core plus choice model. About 40% of their time is spent on a shared foundational core, so everybody gets the essential knowledge. But the majority, a full 60%, is for individual pathways. So, for example, in history, everyone might learn about the foundations of democracy. That's the core. But from there, one student might follow their pathway by diving deep into ancient Greek philosophy, while another decides to create a whole documentary on the civil rights movement. Same core, totally different passions. And the teaching approach? It has to change completely too. Students become co-investigators, working alongside their teachers. They get to show what they know in all sorts of ways, not just writing an essay, but by making things, through art, through debate. And the teacher, their role shifts from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. They're an expert mentor who uses their authority to open doors for students, not to box them in. But of course, here's the elephant in the room. How do you measure success in a system like this? How do you grade it? Well, that means you have to totally rethink testing and assessment. You have to move away from just grading the final product and start valuing the entire learning journey. And you can really see that shift here. The old model puts almost all of its focus on the final product, right? That final test score. But this new model says, wait a second, the process, the effort, the growth is just as important. And so is self-reflection, the student's ability to even understand how they're learning.
At the end of the day, this whole new way of assessing is designed to protect that freedom of spirit. By not relying so heavily on stressful, high-stakes tests, you lower the fear of failure, which actually encourages kids to take intellectual risks. It values the student's own voice and just gets that every single learning journey is going to look different. And that brings us to our last piece, culture. Because a vision like this, it's not just a stack of papers or lesson plans. This philosophy has to be lived in the hallways, in every conversation, in the very air of the school. The environment is the curriculum. And the absolute bedrock of this entire culture is psychological safety. This part is completely non-negotiable. Why? Because a student can't develop their freedom of spirit, they can't be curious or ask tough questions or take risks if they don't feel fundamentally safe to be exactly who they are. This puts a huge responsibility on the adults in the building. Their job is to see every young person not as some fixed thing, but as an evolving human whose path isn't set in stone. They have to guide, not control. And maybe the most important thing, they have to model what it looks like to be a curious, reflective, lifelong learner themselves. And that really brings us to the ultimate point. This quote from the source material just says it all perfectly. The goal is to remember that every student is so much more than a grade or a test score or a future job. They are a living, evolving center of consciousness. And helping them flourish, that isn't just a nice idea, it's their right, and it's our collective responsibility. So, as we wrap up, I'll leave you with this question to chew on. When you think about the schools in your own community, what's one single thing? It could be a policy, a practice, even just an attitude. What's one thing that could be changed to better honor and cultivate the freedom of spirit of every single student who walks through those doors?